In finance, the data is being botched. I don't really care if it's happening on purpose or if it's happening by accident. It doesn't matter. The data is wrong. So what we have to do is we have to identify the correct data. And in order to do that, thankfully, we still have access to this data. The data is free and abundant, but the proper analysis is scarce and costly. So what we need to do is we need to take a step back and say, how do I determine what inflation is? Well, the real rate of inflation is up for debate. But if you sit down on your personal balance sheet and you look at your expenses compared to your living standards and your quality of life and how you like to spend and consume, well, then what that means is that you can sit down and calculate a number. Now, if you sit down and you take the time to calculate that number, I guarantee you it's not 3.7%. It's not. And it's definitely not 2%. But the people who are buying the 10-year, they think it's going to be 2%. They think the Fed is going to get that rate back down to 2%. They can't get that rate back down to 2%. That's why the yield started shooting off. The smarter money started realizing, oh my gosh, it's not 2%. It can't be 2%. It's 3%. It's 4%. It's 5%. And that's what the real risk is here. You saw a couple of the Fed presidents speak today. One of them came out and said, we have to try to figure out what's causing the long end of the curve to go up. We just don't understand. Why don't people trust us? We know exactly what we're saying. We know what the 2% target is. We know we're going to achieve that target no matter what. Why is the long end of the curve going up? Well, the long end of the curve, the notes and the bonds are going up because the smart money is saying, yeah, I'm going to call your bluff on that. I'm not being compensated enough. 3.5% for 10 years is not enough. Sell. And then the way that they get incentivized to buy again is when the yield goes up, right? So if you understand that process, there's one conclusion that you have to come to. And this is the most important thing I'll say all night. The Fed has lost the natural ability to attract demand by raising interest rates. Because if they raise interest rates, sure, the nominal yield is going to go up. But actually, because of the way the system works and because of the $34 trillion of debt plus $211 trillion of unfunded liabilities plus the ongoing deficit budget, the higher the interest rate goes, the larger the deficit. The larger the deficit, the more they need to borrow. The more they need to borrow, the faster the dollar gets inflated or devalued. The faster the dollar gets devalued, the faster the real yield drops, right? Because real yield is the nominal number minus the percent inflation. So if they're printing money to pay the yield, and then the real inflation rate is just say 5% for sake of math. It's higher than that, but just say right now it's 5%. Then you would take the 5% that you're getting or the 4.5% that you're getting in the 10-year, and you would subtract the 5%. Well, that's negative, right? If you subtract 2%, you got positive yield. You're growing your purchasing power. But when you use real inflation, what happens is you figure out that the yield is negative. The real yield is negative. And the higher they raise the rate, the more inflation they cause. The more inflation they cause, the higher they have to raise the rate to get people to buy the debt. But the higher they raise the rate, the more inflation they cause. That's the debt circle. And we are stuck in it right now. And it's most evident by the fact that the Federal Reserve cannot raise rates without causing more inflation. Therefore, they cannot raise rates to attract smart buyers because the nominal rate goes up. But the higher the nominal rate goes up, the lower the real yield goes down. They have lost control of the yield curve, and we need to be paying attention.